Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Ag View Pitch. We have Zach Smith with us today talking protein sovereignty. And Zach, I looked up sovereignty on the way here this morning, and I'm going to read the definition. Sovereignty is the supreme, absolute, and uncontrollable power by which an independent state governs itself, free from external control. That's pretty bold. I don't know. It seems pretty bold when you think about protein sovereignty.
It is, but I love it. And when I use the phrase, it does connect with people instantly. At least they have some understanding of the definition. And there's definitely a trend toward people wanting to take, the production of protein back essentially into their own hands with the crazy world that we're living in right now. So,
And so what we're talking about today is the Stockcropper, which is a brainchild of you and some others, and a process that's been going on for, I don't know, what is it, 5 years now, 4 or 5 years now?
we're in our sixth year. We started about this time in 2020. So it's been a long time.
Yeah, and it seems like seems like a long time, and you've had many different iterations of what we're going to talk about today. But if you would please, as a brief introduction, we had done another podcast here a few weeks ago around water quality. But for those that didn't have a chance to listen to that, can you just give an introduction to who Zach is?
Yeah, so Zach Smith, I'm a 46-year-old farmer from northern Iowa. I farm right in between Minneapolis and Des Moines on the Iowa-Minnesota border, just 20 miles west of I-35. I've spent most of my career, I got a degree in agronomy from Iowa State, go Cyclones. Hopefully
We
yesterday
both
was
got
kind of
hats. We both got hats on today, so we're
yeah,
representing.
hopefully they can keep making a run here in the tourney. And then I spent essentially the next 15 years working in ag retail sales in various forms. But lastly, as a pioneer seed dealer, and then I retired from that because I had the opportunity to farm full time in 2021, and then the stock cropper had happened in 2020, and I wanted to spend more time focusing on that. And so for the last since 2022, I've been a full-time farmer, and then working on developing this wild thing called the stock cropper and taking it through the various iterations and pivots that we've made. And uh, yeah, and so I do this, and I'm a dad to two daughters, both at Iowa State, and I think that's me. Unless you thought I left any details out, Shane.
No, I just two quick things. If people are listening to this, we have a full presentation that we're going to kind of walk through today, just with pictures and visualization. So, if this is the right time for you to pause and go over to YouTube and take a look at it there, I think people will really enjoy the visuals that you have put together on this. And then the second thing is the last episode that we did was episode number 751, talking on water quality. They're in Iowa, but just kind of some general management procedures. And I think that would give people a really good perspective on how you think about things, what you're passionate about, what's important to you, and really what we feel is important to the future of agriculture here. And I think a lot of these systems, I think the water quality pairs well with stock cropper, not only for land use efficiency, but looking at nutrient management. Did you have all of those goals kind of in mind, or is that how some of this came to fruition, or is it more like, hey, this looks like something cool. We should think about doing this?
Yeah, no, all of that was rolled into it, and so our origin story, I've told it a million times, but it's a good one. It was two or three farmers that were passionate about all this stuff. I was three strip tillers originally, myself, Sheldon Stevemer, and Lance Peterson. And the genesis of we wanted to create a system that was better for soil, water, communities, rural America in general. That was kind of the mission in the winter of 2020, and we were trying to do something with strip intercropping to make it better. That was the goal, and the idea was shared instead of doing crops just like corn, soybean, or corn, hay or some other thing. What if we injected livestock back into a field like corn? And it was a wild idea, but we were our imagination took off. And what if it wasn't just one species of livestock? What if it was a whole wagon train of multi-species? So we know that we don't have enough biodiversity on the landscape, and there's value to different gut biomes and manure sources. And so what if we created a device that could carry, multiple things, and it could be solar powered, and could carry enough food and water, onboard capacity, and we could do it in the strip intercropping thing so that we could create a perfect rotation so that where the animals go one year, the corn then would be rotated in, and you could minimize your nutrient load off the farm to bring onto the farm. And, so the animals are there to feed the soil, and the corn is there to be produced to feed the monogastric animals that exist that aren't ruminants, like the pigs and the chickens that we have. And so that was the idea in 2020. And thankfully, Sheldon he's a brilliant egg engineer, still producing awesome products today that I use on my own farm beyond Stockcropper. But he and I designed this, what you see on the screen, and we launched it in the field in 2020. And it was on from there. We put it on the internet and got attention from folks, and uh, yeah, the system was kind of born, and we've been rolling with it ever since.
So on the screen, for those that are listening, what's the way to describe that? Is it like a back-to-back reverse monoslope roof that feeds water, would have solar panels on top, and then like basically two mobile pens? Is that a good way to describe it?
Yeah, so for those that are listening, we called our creation the ClusterCluck 5000 because it was essentially, a three-ring animal circus on wheels rolling through a cornfield. And so there's a leading pen. So the idea is that we want all of the animals to be able to touch the soil and touch the forage. So the leading pen is for the ruminants to hit the pasture as the barn moves. I didn't say that before, with an electric winch is how we advanced it the first year. And then we have a central barn that has the carrying capacity of shelter, the carrying capacity of feed, a raised tenderfoot floor so that in inclement weather, the animals can be up and out of the mud otherwise, or for like with pigs, we can lock them in so that they don't destroy things if we see fit. And then behind, what you don't see in this picture are chicken tractors
Hmm.
that were attached through a hitch system. So we had four different species of livestock: sheep, goats, pigs, and chickens, that were kind of moving in this wagon train with the power of a winch in between within a strip intercropping dynamic or system of 20 foot of crop, or 20 foot of corn, 20 foot of pasture, 20 foot of corn, in that kind of rotational pattern across the field.
And this is getting a little ahead of myself, but I'm curious because I've watched the different iterations, if you will, or the different models that you guys have kind of worked through here. How do you think about the right width? Because we're going to talk about some of the PTI data here later on, but what's the right width for a system like this when it comes to transport, movement, livestock health? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, we had no idea what was going to be right our first time out, but I think what we came up with the first time, like if this was actually something that that would be scalable, like across the Midwest or whatever, it would be this 20-foot configuration. It's not as efficient for the corn. So if you're trying to maximize for corn yield, um, the narrower the better. So like with what you alluded to at the PTI farm, they use 10-foot windows. And so we've tested everything and built barns for everything over the last 6 years, from a 10-foot barn to a 20-foot barn to a 30-foot barn. But probably from the cost of the fixed infrastructure of the barn, and when you do the economics of what you're able to cover and the stocking rates that you can put in, the 20 foot is probably the right dimension. And it also matches up better with commonly used equipment, especially for the corn side of things. An 8-row corn head is still, pretty easy to have. A 4-row, not as much. So it doesn't. I mean, I guess you could use a 12-row head and take two strips at a time if you're going to harvest corn that way. But yeah, so that's what I would say to that.
So let's if you want to move to any of your other slides while we're talking here that you feel is relevant, the different iterations, I mean that had to be a learning process because you guys were, I mean, there's welding, there's wood, there's you got electrical drives, you have I don't know if you ever had any hydraulic components, but you got solar, you got GPS. Talk
Yeah.
talk about some of that.
Yeah, so th this slide is the first year the site that we had. This was a very small thing, and that's the thing I want to be clear on. Like we've done this basically at test plot level.
Mm.
So at our largest, we're at about 5 acres. So a lot of people think I'm doing this on like thousands or hundreds of acres, and no, it's not. Like we've been trying to develop it and figure out what works and what doesn't work on a small scale. So this is the setup in 2020, what it looked like sitting on about 2 acres. We had three different strips. And like you said, it's all, we didn't know like how the pasture was going to react with the mix that we put out. So we planted a cool season mix and we started through it. And the first strip, it worked pretty well. But then we had too many oats in it, and the oats started to mature, and they choked everything out underneath. And so this picture over here to the upper right, where you see it really bare, it was really bare because the oats, we had to basically cut the oats and then feed hay through the strip because there wasn't anything that came up other than the golden oat straw there. So
Yeah.
so that first year we learned a lot about like timing of the seeding, the species mix. We figured out that we needed to probably have two different seedings, a cool season seeding and then a warm season seeding after that. But we learned an incredible amount of what works and what doesn't work that first year when it was really small. And then we scaled up to um, the larger plot that you see here. This is where we had the barns running from 2021 to 2024 on my family's home farm on State Highway 9 here in northern Iowa. And this shows the system with all three iterations of widths. So a 30-foot over to the left with the Max 9 version. We called it that because it was the same year the X9 came out from Deere, and we thought it was funny. So there's always a little bit of sarcasm in everything we do with this project. And then we have the 5,000 here, the original one in the middle, and then the what would become the Nano, which you see in the lower right hand. So you can see in the pictures that we were using tractors to pull them the first year because we didn't have all of the technology in 2021 figured out, like with the GPS and the solar power and the automated winches. That stuff all came later. But in 2021, we did develop this. This was built in the lower right. This is our first attempt at automating this with GPS auto steer. This is called the ClusterCluck Nano. This was a 10-foot version, the original one that we debuted. This is at Jason Mock's Field Day. This was done in conjunction with Joe Bassett at Dawn Equipment, made in Milwaukee, and we had this one, 2021. We made that one, and then you can see the Max 9 up here. We launched that on the 4th of July. We put the American flag up, and this one had cattle and hogs in it, which was really interesting. This was probably one of the funnest uses of PPP money that anyone spent in 2020. 2021 is making this boat anchor to pull across the field. So,
So are all these iterations still in the countryside today, or
yeah.
what have you done with them?
Yeah, so all of the iterations exist. The Max 9 is still at my place. The ClusterCluck 5000 now is out at Rick Bieber's farm, the fields of Cincinnati in southwestern Wisconsin. And this Nano is broke in my yard in Iowa because long story, we ordered motors from China. They were like really super expensive, and they're too expensive to fix. And so this it's like a lot of prototypes. You have a graveyard, and this one
Yeah.
sits in the graveyard. It's an expensive graveyard, but we've had fun nonetheless. And then, or go ahead.
Well, I think there's a point there that I wanted to ask you about, and I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought there, but the the process that you're talking about of you try something, pieces of it work, pieces of it don't. Then you try something different, then you try something different. I mean, the iterations that you've gone through here, I guess I would say that I really respect that, and I think it's so critical for people to think about like within their farm operations because what you're presenting here, and I've been following you for several years, so it's not like new to me, but what you're presenting is a very new concept to a lot of people, and it's something that like, hey, maybe we haven't had livestock in a long time, and the possibilities people's wheels are probably churning here. But one thing that I really respect out of what you and the team and the different people that you have worked with over time have done is you just try new iterations. And I think the more at bats that you have, the higher likelihood you have to find success and find what works. And I hope that's an encouragement to people of trying new things on the farm, things that are, even as far out as a stock cropper, but how can you do things in your current cropping system or your current management that I just want to encourage people that as we're coming into the 2026 growing season here, try new things, do something different. So, sorry to interrupt your train of thought there, but I really like that about this process.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I'm glad you paused me or to talk about it because that was the thing. Like it was three farmers trying to come up with instead of just beating our heads against the wall, raising corn and beans and being pissed off at the world about, the hamster wheel that business is, and our dependence on government programs and all the things we don't like about it. Like what could we do differently? And that's you know, we thought differently. And yeah, people thought we were batshit crazy when we like first put we were kind of scared to put it on the internet with how much we were going to get made fun of for doing this wild idea. But we did it and it resonated with a lot of folks and it's manifested a whole lot of stuff that we haven't talked about yet that we can get into later. But one of the things I wanted to show on this slide here, since I was thinking about to show kind of the idea of the system that we learned from the first year into the second year, was this idea of creating a racetrack pattern.
Mm,
So when you see each one of these barns, there's essentially two strips of pasture here. If you look at the center one, where the green one, so you can see there's the dark green strip of pasture on the right as it's going down, and then we have corn and soybeans and an intercrop in between there. But the barn started on that first really dark green spot in the bottom of the picture, and then it moved down, and then we turned it on the end there, and then came back to where you see it right now. So you can see the the progression of grazing all the way down to the ground and then the recovery. And then, from a nutrient standpoint, which you touched on, you literally can see the nutrients in this pasture from where the barn has been versus where the barn is going. So when we talk about things, like we talked about on the last podcast with manure in the state of Iowa, getting
mm,
applied to ground without any type of living root, and it ends up, some of it likely ends up in the tile drainage systems. This farm's got 60-foot pattern tile underneath it.
mm.
But you can visibly see what we're doing with, the urine and the feces that are coming out of the back end. They're getting converted back into organic stable forms of plant material to hold those nutrients. And then, the idea is that in the next year that will be slow release back to the crop that we plant where that goes. So the idea with the system is, we figured out that about a 750-foot lane with a kind of a turn lane in the middle so that you can essentially run over the same acre twice within the growing season is about right. And when you do that, it only takes about 0.82 acres for this 20-foot barn to exist on and produce a hell of a lot of protein. And in the meanwhile, you're putting nutrients down that you can reduce for the next year. It's about 75% reduction in nutrients because it's coming out the back of the animal. And then we can plant corn into that the following year.
So when I think about this picture, that racetrack that you referred to, it's almost like a self-sucking vacuum. You're going back around on that same acre. A few questions I want to ask just out of my curiosity that I haven't asked you in the past is when are you able to get the livestock out on this? I'm thinking your climate, northern Iowa. Do you have a cool season mix from the prior fall that you can get out there in April?
No, it probably wouldn't be that soon for a couple of reasons. You got to think about this. You've got water systems that are outside, and there's no way to get heat to them. A lot of people think, well, you can just use your solar. Well, heating elements take a ton of solar energy, and so our solar is focused on just the movement of the barn, whether it's a winch or for the drive system. That power's got to be just for movement. So, you need to wait till it's warm enough for that, for not having water freeze, and then also have the animals finish before the water freezes again in the fall. And so the idea is to, you probably the earliest you could get out there would be maybe the 15th or 20th of May.
Mm,
And part of that is that, you're going to have young animals that are more susceptible, specifically with chickens, and even small feeder pigs. They don't probably like 30-degree nights,
yeah.
as well as much. And so So the idea is kind of it's a warm, a 3.5 to 4 month warm season type of process to introduce the animals and move them, essentially from June through the end of October, early November.
And the chickens that are going out there, these are meat chickens, right? People aren't putting
Correct.
layer hens out there. I mean, that's not, you
We
could,
we
but
you could, but the dollars are much better with meat production for the
okay.
system.
So you said 0.82 acres for a 20-foot barn. How frequently are you moving that? And then what's your date stamp on the back end? If you're middle of May, are you going until September 15th, October 15th,
No, it'd be to the end of October,
end
you
of
know.
October? Sorry, you might have
Yeah.
said that and I just missed it because I was taking some notes here.
Yep.
Um, so I mean, what kind of protein are you producing in that time period then?
Yeah, so let me just flip ahead here. I'll get through this is the max 9 and
And don't let me
10.
forget, I want to ask you about some of the seeding stuff here later on, but let's talk on this first.
Yeah. So this is the breakdown of what I was just talking about. So the 5,000 runs on a little bit more than 3/4 of an acre. We hit the same spot twice in the year. From that, we're producing 10 hogs, 8 ruminants up front, whether it's lambs or goats, and then 250 unit batches of chickens. So you'll have two growth cycles of chickens throughout the season. And what that has the potential of generating is if you use average USDA pasture raised pricing, so this is not using commodity pricing like what you would sell out of a CAFO or chickens from a Tyson barn or whatever. But if you use average USDA pricing, it's about $15,000 an acre of gross revenue for what this barn is producing. And then in between, our corn yields in 2023, when I put this data together, we hit about in the 8 row strip, we hit 305 for our average yield in that. Our normal corn for comparison, that was like literally 60 feet away in regular 30-inch strip till production with commercial, full rates commercial fertilizer. That was about 235 or 240 that year.
Hmm.
Um, and so, but like where we've been doing the Stockcropper for a couple of years, we haven't put any dry fertilizer on it. And so we've got about a 75% reduction from the nutrient credits that we can get from the manure. We're really only putting on some additional nitrogen to be able to drive that high corn yield potential that we have within the strip. But the difference between just growing monocrop corn or monocrop soybeans like what everybody else does or what we do too on our own farm, we've 10x the amount of biodiversity with the additionality of the four different species of livestock and then, a 6 to 8 cover crop mix on top of that. So we have a much more biodiverse system in general. So
So that 305 bushel an acre, just because I know people always get bent out of shape about how you calculate this, that's on the footprint of where the corn actually is. And so the benefit is to the outside rows from manure, biodiversity, sunlight. Talk to me about that a little bit.
yeah, it's just all those things.
Okay.
The edge effect is a lot of it. But there's an obvious benefit to beyond the edge effect to the biology. We see that in the PTI data that we'll share here shortly because they had been doing the same intercropping system with corn and beans and that was their high stuff before we came. And then there's an obvious bounce to the biology portion of this as well.
So talk to me about the seed cost. You mentioned like a 7 or 8 way cover crop mix. I'm a seed guy is part of what I do. And so I get all amped up when you're talking about the cool weather, the warm weather. We do soybeans and small grains and I like doing that, but some of this other stuff is kind of exciting. So talk to me about like seed cost, mixes. How do you think about timing? Because and I'll preface this by saying my biggest question is, okay, the grazing that you have here and in the picture you have on the screen is there's not a lot going on behind that. Do you have to go back and reseed that, or does it just depend on the mix?
It depends on the mix, and what species you have. I mean, a lot of people will look and say, "Oh, you just way overgrazed this," and yeah, it's intense. The pigs are the biggest part of the problem. They do the most amount of disruption. But if we flip back to, let's see here, I get back to the right one. You flip back to this picture. I mean,
Mm.
it comes back pretty good. Like a lot of this is warm season, sorghum Sudan and Japanese millet, I think, if I remember right. But it will depend. Like if it's too much and it seems thin, like we have gone back and reseeded, behind it to make sure that we've got plenty. I can't remember the cost of my mixes. I mean, the seed is such an inconsequential part of if you're generating $15,000 of protein, whether it's $30 per seed or 70, it doesn't make that much of a difference in the grand scheme of things and the profitability. The
Yeah.
most important thing is to make sure that you have the right mix at the right time. So what we usually what we did, or this was in 2021, and I think 22 and 23 we went to seeding a cool season in the first lane, and then we waited a little bit and then put in a warm season mix like the first week of June, that we would seed into the second lane here.
Mm.
So and then if the cool season, we would always have some warm season in the cool season. If it wasn't thick enough, then we would come back and seed more warm season directly into that stand to make sure that when the barn got back there in 45 days or whatever, that we had plenty for the ruminants to live off of. So
And were you just broadcasting that?
no, I had I'd bought a 10 or a 15-foot tie drill that I had modified down to a 10-foot so that I could go out there and, something, a $1,200 drill just to be able to put it in there. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. Anything else on the like the seating or the mixes that you think that people have asked you questions on that I might be missing there, Zach?
no, I mean, we have so many variables here. Like everybody wonders, like we really had that part dialed in. I'm not claiming we did.
Yeah.
Again, when we started this, like we didn't know what was going to work and what not to work, and I don't have the capacity to have all the replications of every different seeding mix to try it out. Like a lot of this is just trying to figure out the first principles stuff. And,
Hmm.
like that's the thing I tell people too. Like it's pretty incredible. I mean, I'm not trying to pat ourselves in the back too hard here, but it's pretty incredible what we've achieved with how little capital
Mm.
and like talent and, available to do this. I mean, I've been developing this while still farming full time and having a lot of other things going on. And if, I think my hope is that, that someday, somebody can give this thing some real oxygen, like we give capital to a lot of other things in this business that aren't as promising as what this is. And
Well, and I think a point there is it works, you know,
yeah,
and that's the cool part about this is you guys maybe didn't have it all figured out. You had an idea. You said, "Hey, let's get this seed out there. We'll figure out what works or what doesn't work." But the point is, you're raising livestock. You're on the land. You have that, manure piece right there where you want it. How frequently were you moving these once a day, twice a day?
yeah, I keep failing to say that. So it's not linear, right? It's kind of there's a curve on the need because when the animals are small and when depending on the size of the forage for what's available, you kind of it's there's kind of an art to it. But typically 2 times a day when they're small is good for like the first rotation, and then we'll speed up to 3 times a
Okay.
day because on the second turn the forage isn't as thick in
Mm.
a lot of the cases, and so because of the hogs killing stand in some places, and so that was another thing like with hogs. Uh, when they root, they do a lot of good, but they also can screw things up. And so we had to experiment with like ringing hogs for the first time, and wouldn't say we're over successful with that. I didn't have an old boy to come show me how to do it the right way. I'd put a bunch of rings in the nose, but within 2 weeks, a lot of times they'd fallen out, and then they're back to rooting again. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just things like that that you think in the wintertime, oh yeah, that's easy. We'll just solve that by doing that. And then it doesn't work. And you're like, well, shit, what do I do now? So,
Well,
but
the reason I was asking about the movement is you had kind of referenced that 750-foot racetrack, and is that total, like total distance?
no, that's one way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and when I do the math on that, so I'm thinking, here in the I states where these square 160s or 80s, you got quarter mile long rows, that's 1,300 feet. Do you think a system like this is easier kind of set up in blocks to where you would turn
Yeah.
around halfway across the 160, or do you try to go the full quarter mile length?
No, no. So, yeah, I mean, I thought about all this when we were designing like what this could look like in the square grid of Iowa here. And so, yeah, you would split a half-mile long field into 3 blocks, essentially. If you figure there's whatever 2,500 foot length and a half mile, yeah, split it up into 3 blocks of 750 feet, and yeah, so you would just have a block of each, and and that's how it would work.
Last question I had on the seeding side is people worry about weeds. What'd you see for
Mhm.
weed control, or did you have to do any management on that end?
I mean, in the pasture stuff, as long as you get stuff established early, and get it off. I mean, the other thing is that like the goats will eat anything,
Yeah.
so uh, there is a biological control. Yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say we had escapes of water hemp or lamb's quarter that come through if you don't get the seeding right or if it doesn't rain. But then you have the livestock to come through and clean that up at the same point. So I honestly think like a system like this could be really, really powerful, like in organic setting, especially now that you have things like carbon robotics with their laser weeder
Mm,
that you could come through in the corn because we were still using herbicides to control weeds in the corn. It was a very delicate situation. You had to like 6:15 in the morning, you had to be out there with, air inducted tips to make sure we weren't drifting into where, the livestock were going to graze.
yeah.
So, but I think with some of these other technologies that are coming to market, could be a really, really interesting thing in conjunction with this. So for weed
Cool.
control.
Let's move to some of the PTI stuff. If you want to go to your slide there and talk about
Yeah.
what is, or if there's something that you want to hit on beforehand, that's
No.
totally fine too. But like, what is PTI first of all? How did you get involved with that process, and then where are we at today?
Yeah. So Jason Webster is the guy in the middle there, and he runs Precision Planning's PTI farm in Pontiac, Illinois, which is just I know down the street from you. But it's essentially a 500-acre agronomy testing or 500-acre agronomy testing farm
Mm,
where they evaluate similar, probably like to Beck's PFR, farm or something like that. Where they evaluate a lot of different products and a lot of different technologies for to see what the impact is on yield and then farmer profitability. Those are kind of the two metrics that they look at. And the thing I appreciate about Jason is an outside of the box thinker, and he doesn't have any rules as far as what he can bring onto the farm,
mm,
which is crazy because I in 2022 I was headed to the Farm Progress Show with Sheldon to go down and look at stuff and I get my phone rang and like, hey, this is Jason Webster. And I'm like, okay.
yeah.
I wasn't expecting that phone call. He's like, we've been watching what you're doing on the internet and we think you're onto something because we've been doing the same thing with a strip intercropping and that's how we're getting our highest corn yield and highest farmer profitability. But the soybeans suck and we need to find something to boost that in the middle. And we love the idea of putting livestock. So could you send us one of your prototypes? And so we had just made in 2022 two of the new versions of the ClusterCluck Nano, which is the barn that you see behind, which was a redesign of that first one, which was originally a dual species, so just sheep and poultry. And we've since then added in hogs, so it's a true three species. So we sent this in 2023. They set up a Stockcropper plot there at PTI to basically copy the system that we'd created. And they ran the barn the first year on the pasture strips, and then in 2024 they planted corn into the pasture strips for the first time.
Mm,
And right out of the gate, I mean, the previous all-time production record at PTI was 403 bushel an acre. And let me get to the results slide here. And in 2024, we came in and rang the bell at 434.9, broke the
mm,
yield record by 32 bushels right out of the gate. And so, and when you look back, so you can see like the yield level, they always have a control of like what they call like standard Illinois production. So still a really good yield of 250 bushels an acre. But we were just a lot better than that with kind of the unique arrangement and the power of biology adding to that. And so then we followed it up last year in 2025, where they ran it for the second year in a row. And we came in again. We didn't break the all-time record that we set the year before. We were pretty damn close, so at like 426.7, so almost 427 bushel an acre. And we had when they did all the profitability, farmer ROI, we were the most profitable system, for a farmer if they were able to scale this and sell the livestock for the prices that we talked about. You know, uh, Kind of roll coal on everything in agriculture that they tested it against. So a pretty neat opportunity that he gave a weird idea like this. And I
mm,
mean, Jason catches a lot of flack for this, but because Stockcropper is one of the toughest things for his interns to do. I know his interns hate my project there, for all the things that can go wrong. But Jason loves it because he's a pure agronomy guy, and honestly, Jason, I give him a ton of credit. Like he's probably one of the only mainstream people that works within the confines of big ag that is giving these farm weird concepts that like Stockcropper or a lot of the stuff that Jason Mock or others have been doing in this gap arrangement, or yourself, even what you played with Shay, like of doing these weird techniques. And it was wild when I went to their results show to see our product, they say essentially winning there. I mean, the other thing that was winning a lot was the gap arrangements and like, two rows of corn, a row of beans and like all of these other weird things that a lot of people would write off. But in this day and age when like people are looking, how do we have a chance of profitability here? It's these farm weird things that are giving the biggest responses. It's just a matter of whether or not people can allow that to creep into their head and have the curiosity to flesh it out and see if they can make it work. Is it all easy? No, it's not. But
Yeah.
that was one of the things that we said when we started Stockcropper. It may not be Stockcropper that scales and wins just because there's a lot of obstacles, to it. But like, what are the other concepts that this system will teach us that we could scale across crop production to make things better than what we have so that farmers could retain more value instead of having to, rely on somebody to come with the next, bug in a jug or solution to give us, a few more bushels an acre. Like what are the transformational things that we can do for free, which is the power of arrangement to produce it ourselves.
Yeah. The first of all, I just want to make a comment when you went back to the Nano there. I love the engineering, the look of this. I mean, whoever's building this stuff, I don't know who it is on the team that's building it, but like that's beautiful engineering to me. I mean, I've always liked the appeal of the design, and I don't know if it's the powder coating or whatever, but I just want to make a comment there. It's not like you threw a bunch of two by fours together, and not that there's anything wrong with that from a cost or a protein sovereignty standpoint back to the human component of this, but man, those designs are awesome, and I think there's a lot of ingenuity that goes into that. I don't know if you have any comments on that, but
Yeah, no, this is so the Nano, both of the Nanos are co-designs by me and Joe Bassett from Dawn, and yeah, and Joe designs beautiful things, and that was one of the things that we said is that we're going to make beautiful design with this. It doesn't, yeah, because in order for it to be credible, I mean, there's enough reasons for the people are going to be critical of this. At least it needs to look good
yeah.
when it goes across the field. So that's been kind of the central mantra of everything that we've done with it.
Yeah.
So.
So, all right, talk to me if this is a natural point. Talk to me a little bit about the autonomy of movement, the GPS, because like you said, it's not necessarily less work. And I think that's why a lot of people got away from livestock. And I'll pick on myself too. I grew up around livestock. And the manure management piece is what is preventing me or has prevented me from getting back into livestock just because I don't like that component of it of how do you manage all that. There's a lot of issues that go along with that too. So there's work in raising livestock as there should be. I think that's kind of by design, but there's ways that you guys have looked at making this way easier from autonomous movement, GPS. Where are you at on that today, and kind of what have the iterations of that looked like?
Yeah, so there's a lot of challenges to doing this out in the confines of the corn. It looks easy and sexy on a slide presentation, but there's a lot of we've gone through a lot of pain points trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. So the Nano that we have on the screen here, this is equipped with two solar panels, 24-volt battery system, and then we have wheel motors on each one of the wheels that you can't see. They're tucked inside of the frame there. And then we also, if you look on top of the panels, you can see a couple pucks. We've got multiple GPS pucks as well as a cell modem for being able to get, like say, RTK picture signal, so that you can have what's the term? Well, basically RTK on
With
it.
sub-inch accuracy with
Yeah.
straight directional alignment for those that aren't familiar with the RTK. I mean, you're down to centimeters of accuracy, and then over long periods of time, even as all the satellites in the sky move, you're down to that sub-inch accuracy.
So we developed essentially our own auto steer system and software, with the help of the guys at Don in 2021 and 2022. it kind of works, but for the budget that we have, it worked probably better than it should have, considering how limited we were on things.
Mm,
But there's issues, one of the issues that we ran into, especially is when you get into wet weather, and a lot of people ask this question: what happens when it rains? When you're just driving off of wheels and it gets really slimy and you're driving on top of residue, you can spin out and have issues, and we definitely have had that problem. And so I think what I would say about like if this was done at scale, what I would say is it probably won't require auto steer. I could see other ways of guiding this would be much, much simpler with much fewer problem rates that you can have with, the system dropping or, if you were relying on Core's RTK or something like that and the system is down, well, that doesn't work, right? And
mhm,
so what I really could see if you had like a whole field of these, like 160 acres of them, I think what makes more sense would be having autonomous winch systems, like what where there'd be a huge winch cable and a central motor. So then when it was time to move the barns would be physically connected and just pull in a straight line.
mm,
Or maybe would have some other source of like feeler directional control that they could maybe self-steer a little bit if they were getting off or if they were on terrain or something like that. Because the winch always works. I mean, I've moved with a winch. I've moved, 3 hours after a 5-inch rain with a winch. But when you spin out, you're dead in the water. And so I think it definitely helps to have good soil health. And
mm.
so if you've been managing stuff, not doing a lot of tillage, so that the barn would just sink to China down to the tillage depth, if you have that established before, that's really made a big difference too. So.
Yeah. And it, first of all, the fact that you guys put that together and the team at Dawn and whoever I think is really cool and should be encouraging for people that as we have the development of these technologies and open source software and the ability to create these tools through cheaper electrical and electronic components, I don't know. I think that's amazing and I think there's a lot of opportunities in agriculture as we move forward with some of that. Is one thing that you had talked about of like and how I've thought about it too is like a train, could you have a train of these and two or three in a row and then you're moving 80 feet at a time with a winch system? Does it make sense to have more animals in the same pass or more animals on different strips that are adjacent from a management perspective if you were to do this at a field scale?
Yeah, I think more animals across instead of all stacked because the density of animals, you just do too much impact and then you don't get the recovery. So the whole idea is you want to hit it, impact it for a few short hours, and then constantly keep it moving and get the animals off so that you don't do too much damage. So the pasture can come back essentially. So like I said, I think about it when I was a kid and we had a farrowing house with a scraper system underneath it. You would go and hit the lever and all of the scrapers would pull from underneath the crates to the
Yep.
pit. And it would be the same type of thing, just at a larger scale where you would have some infrastructure in the middle of the field, kind of similar. It's kind of a similar concept like the 360 rain, type
Yeah.
of deal, where you think about like what they say, the 50-yard line for the machine to come back to and turn around or whatever, and something similar to that. So,
Okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit about, I know you have some slides here on like arrangement of systems and things like that. Talk to me about how do you think about this moving forward based on what's been successful or you know, whatever comes to mind from an arrangement standpoint.
so then in 2022, I started experimenting with other concepts outside of Stockcropper for like broad acre implications with 60-inch twin row corn, 90-inch twin row corn, 120-inch twin row corn, essentially trying to figure out the different combinations. This is a hybrid test plot at three different planting populations at those different schematics compared to 30-inch corn. We just put a ton of work into this. On top of Stockcropper, we had about 14 other tests that we were trying to, find iterations that would work. I really like the ability. I think there's a ton of potential with twin rows to do some really, really interesting things in small use of canopy with something else growing short next to it. Especially for people that have cattle, I think this is a huge opportunity in that space. And so, in order to do it right, I bought a twin row gap planter is what I call it. It was an old 12-inch Stein planter with twin row units on it, and I can basically create any type of twin row configuration. So I've done 60s, I've done twin 72s, I've done 90s, I've done 120s. I basically just slide the units to wherever I want them on the shaft to make the alignment. It's a big pain in the ass to do it, but yeah, it's been a fun tool to have on the farm to do some wild stuff with that. And yeah, so these are just some of the pictures of, I think these are the twin 72s that we did in 2023. And then this is some of the what I call the quintuple biopass that we did last year in 25 with twin 60s that you can see with a single 30 in between, and then having a lane in between for doing forage for green chop or a small grain like I'm going to be growing oats for the first time this year with the new oat plant I'm delivering to. And so I was trying to come up with a unique solution where we could use arrangement to crank a tremendous amount of corn yield out of a condensed space and then create avenues to intercrop between that are really interesting. And I could talk for a half an hour just about this piece, but this worked incredibly well. We compared this system of growing corn versus 30-inch with the same amount of plants, the same amount of nitrogen, and we grew 72 bushel an acre. We like 270 corn in this system for the same with the same amount of plants and animals versus 198. And that was loaded with southern rust this year. We didn't have fungicide on this plot
Hmm.
because so and we did it. And the cool thing is it sits on about 78% of the footprint of what the other yield comparison was. So really neat stuff that I've dorked around with outside of the Stockcropper with this farm weird spacing stuff.
So
So
are you planning to frost seed clover and into the oats then and have that as kind of a
yeah,
pathway then,
that
and then
would.
you'll follow that with corn next year, or what's the intent?
Yeah, yeah. So we would rotate and put the corn in between. And the thing I like about this is if you follow Jason Mock, he and I, he talked a lot about alley cropping corn this last year on X, and it came from this idea that I had last March. And he just had, he doesn't have a twin row planter. He's got 20s, so he set his up on I think it's 4 or 5 20s that he did with a gap in between. So I did mine selfishly because I wanted to grow oats in between this. But I'm also going to do an iteration of this where I cut this pass down in half to just be a straight corn play with like a two row 30-inch gap in between the strips of corn with this 5 rows shrunk down into 3 30-inch rows essentially to see what we could do from a yield standpoint and be able to cut inputs back. And then have the forage for if you had cattle or something to graze, in the fall. So, again, like the whole idea with dorking around this is that stock cropper is hard to scale. And we haven't talked about this yet because there's not an independent meat processing system to sell the livestock into. It's a great system, it works, but it only works for the farmer if they can sell and get the meat to a consumer that'll be willing to pay for it. That's the biggest limitation. And so that's why I'm doing this other stuff and I'm interested is like what are things we can do where we can take the lessons of what we learned, get more biology with diversification out and actually be more profitable. That's the name of the game.
But from a protein sovereignty standpoint, I mean, you look at whatever the math was there, 10 hogs, 8 sheep or goats, and then the chickens there. I mean, that's enough for 2 or 3 families from an
Oh yeah.
independent production standpoint on an acre or 2 acres or whatever. I mean, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, so from a family level, yeah, you could have a small plot of this and we could make barns for people to do that. It's just the idea of getting investment at this point to scale that out when there's a hard ceiling on the scale of productivity. It don't, so that works if you have a local butcher that can handle 10 hogs, at a time,
Hmm.
or you decide to butcher them themselves. When you get beyond that we just don't have the regional processing capacity to do large amounts of this. And that's the biggest limiting factor. It's neat, it's cool, it sets records, but very well aware of the limitations that we have on scaling it. So.
So let's talk about kind of the final topic here on where you've been then of making some changes and how you approach the production of products from stock cropper. You've moved a little bit to more of a a single drive unit, and that was based off of my understanding, the production outlook, like you just mentioned, scalability, size, capital invested, who's the consumers of these products. Talk to me a little bit about how you think of where you're at with that today.
Because of what all I just said there with the challenges in probably 2023, I made the decision to pivot so that we could get to a place where we could take what we learned with moving animals autonomously in a cornfield into, instead of a top-down approach of feeding the world, how do we teach people to feed themselves and empower them with autonomous technology for more people to grow their own protein.
Hmm.
And so that's where we really had this focus. You've used the term a couple times, protein sovereignty. And this is a picture of me and my daughters, back when they were, I mean, my daughters are in college now, but this is, probably 10, 12, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. Time goes by so fast. My oldest turned 21 yesterday, and so it's just wild. But she's the one holding the chicken there.
Yep.
But we've been a protein sovereign family since 2008 or 9 when they were like 3 or 4. We started butchering chickens. That's when 2011 we added hogs, and they don't know anything else other than every year we're butchering chickens, and in the summer, and we're butchering pigs in the fall, and we fill our freezer, and we don't buy meat at the store. That's just the way we do it. And so with especially after COVID and like last year with the bird flu, where people are seeing, that we live in a fragile food system. There's been every time those like world events happen, what do people do? They go and they buy chicks at Baumgars or Tractor Supply because they want to have that hedge. And
Hmm.
so we had this idea of trying to expand or make it easier for people to grow their own protein, specifically chickens, because that's the biggest opportunity that's easy for people to get access. They don't take a lot of space. But the problem that exists with it is that if you're going to try to keep them, you can either free range them and be open to predators, or you have to, if you want to be making really healthy meat, you need to have them moving all the time so they're not sitting in their own shit in a coop constantly and having to clean it out. And so people make these chicken tractors, right? So these are mobile devices that you go and you pull or yank around. And so our idea is to make this a much simpler process. So on a Saturday morning, like when we're recording, if you had a few too many whiskeys, the last thing you want to do at 7 a.m. is go out and move your damn chicken tractor.
Yep.
So what if you had a chicken tractor that would have a solar powered drive unit on it that you could either move manually instead of having to go out and pull it physically and having somebody strong enough to do that? What if you had something you could control with a wireless key fob or just have control on your phone app and program it and say, hey, I want you just to move automatically at 7 a.m. in the morning. And so
Hmm.
this unit will be attachable to any existing um, piece of infrastructure that you have. Like here, this is attached to a Joel salad and chicken tractor, where you just bolt it to what you have, and as long as it's on wheels and under 600 pounds, this thing will move it across the landscape here. And yeah, so it's simple, smart, and safe, and we can attach it to any type of pen that's out there right now.
So the simplicity of this, first of all, I love it, and I think it was a great pivot. I think it's great from the market outlook for you guys to get into this space for the right reasons. Now the manual piece on this, you would just walk up to it, and there's controls on it that you could manually move it. Do I understand that correctly?
It's a wireless key fob, so
Okay.
just it was with 4 buttons: up, down, forward, and backwards. Yeah.
Well, you can't run yourself over that way, though, Zach.
Yeah, that's right. We actually, it's not pictured here. We actually have an obstacle avoidance piece so that if it runs in anything, it'll stop. This thing moves super slow. It's like a
Mhm.
1/4 mile an hour.
Okay.
I've got a video here that I can show, I think here. I
Yeah.
think that's, yeah.
Right.
This is simulating an autonomous move. This is on our engineers farm in central Illinois. So the barn raises itself up. We have our chicken fluffer in the background here, scaring the chickens away from the back. That's patent pending as well. So we gave it a 6 foot move here in this case. So you can see the chickens moving ahead with it. It's like about 2/10 of a mile an hour. This thing's advancing. And then it stops and lowers itself back down to the ground. Um, and then the solar panels, just keep harvesting sunlight to recharge the battery we have on board. And it's that simple. It's pretty much it.
And it can move some significant weight. I forget what you had told me offline here, but it can attach to many of these different, like the picture that you're sharing here was a $200 hoop that I had bought from a family that, similar to you, had been Protein Sovereign and had kids that were in 4-H and they were done using it. So me and the girls went over and picked this up on Sunday before the snowstorm came in here. Get it attached to something like this.
Yeah, so up to 600 pounds is what we've designed this unit for. We could make bigger versions of it down, in the future, but I think for our idea is like we're not trying to make devices that you can put 1,000 chickens in.
Mm.
We're making it, protein sovereignty in our business is how do we help people feed their family and not much beyond that. Because once you get beyond that point, there's a lot of problems. You have to have a place to, butcher that many animals, and then you have to get them marketed. And in some cases, that works out well for people, but more people than not to get into the chicken business figure out that it's not much of a business. And
Yeah.
so the idea is like what you're doing with your kids at the perfect age, teach them lessons, then go out and do chores, this thing still needs, you still have the chore element. You can give them the assignment of going out and moving the barn.
Hmm.
But it's accessible. I mean, you could send, your cute little daughters out there with the key fob and they'd love to run the damn thing, and
Yeah.
it would be a safe operation. It's not like you're having them hook up a PTO shaft or something like that. But yeah, so like this contraption right here, all you would have to do is put a couple wheels here on the door side, and then on the far side you would attach the drive to. You would probably need to put one 2x4 in between that center link, so that
Mm.
you have a framework and you bolt it on and it starts lifting and moving the thing around.
Yeah, that's awesome. The next slide that I have here was actually the day after, and this was that's our chicken coop. It was an old dryer shack building for a seed corn blower fan that we had that we moved 2 miles up the road on a gooseneck trailer. It was very redneck, and then we put a chicken run on the outside of it. But nice little 4 foot snowdrift outside of there after we went and picked that up. So the inclement weather piece, I think that's the other thing that you guys are very aware of. And it's not a year round, it's not a constant thing. We talked about that May to October timeframe, but to really capitalize on that, 6 month, call it 6 month window there for a lot of people, there's a lot that can be done in half a year.
Oh yeah, you can grow a ton of meat. And so, the biggest limiting factor is how big is your freezer. And that's, but a family of 4 or 5 people, if you've got a couple freezers in the basement, you can more than take care of your needs with, if you want to grow a pig. And that's the idea is like with the drive, that's not going to be just for chickens. If you want to have a small pig pen that you have a pasture that you want to yank it around and put 2 or 3 hogs in, it'd be very easy to do that with this idea. So.
All right. I know at the end of the slide deck here, is there anything else that we missed as far as slides that we haven't hit on here, Zach, that you think is important?
The only other thing is this one here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't talk about the Pico. So we're coming first to market here this next year with the Drive. So our first commercial run will be next spring in 2027. We'll have a limited production run with these going out, and then the year after that will come with the ClusterCluck Pico, which is the soup to nuts solution. So if you don't want to go to Home Depot and build something like this, you want something a little bit sexier that has gotten my 30 years of growing chicken expertise built into the design. Like I built this device for my wife. She hated ever having to walk into a chicken coop to like feed or water them. Because usually what happens, if you're a farmer, you get this, like you wake up at 4:30 in the morning to go get the sprayer loaded, to be able to start, and the last thing you think about is doing the damn chicken chores.
Yep.
And so you text the wife at 6:30 when you're blowing off your first load, and you say, "Hey, can you move the chicken tractor for me?" And she's got her work clothes on, and she's madder than a hornet because now she's got to go walk through chicken shit to get and so anyway, this barn is designed to be chored from the outside, water, food, and then egg collection as well. This barn can have both meat birds and layers in it.
Mm.
Either one you'd have to pick. But just a lot of things that were pain points that we tried to make a beautifully designed product. So the drive will power the Pico. So this is an earlier prototype version of the drive, but the new version will be attached to this. And
Awesome.
so we'll plan to have this as a full delivery product in 2028. So.
Yep. And I know I got signed up for the pre-order list on, I don't know if it was both of them or one of them for sure, but I don't know, that's it. It's exciting. And that's kind of where I wanted to wrap up here is if people are interested in the Stockcropper, and I know there will be tons of interest. Where do they go? How do they check this out? And I know I got some slides there at the end too.
Yeah, so the best thing is to go to our website, thestockcropper.com. If you're interested in what we're talking about specifically with the drive and the Pico, we do have the ability for to get in line for the deposits list or just general reservation specifically for the Pico. We have a lot of interest in both right now, so if this is something you really think you'd want, we will have a pretty limited run versus what we think demand will be in 2028. So feel free to put a deposit down and hold your line specifically for the drive. That would be great. Otherwise, if you want to see more of this content, you can go to the Stockcropper YouTube page. Just search Stockcropper on YouTube. On X, I have two different profiles. My main one is at Zebulus Prime. That's the one I started it with when I didn't think this was ever going to amount to anything. And now we actually have if you search Stockcropper at Stockcropper, that one we're starting to share more on as well. And I'll probably transition the account there. But we've got Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all of the things. We're on all the
And
platforms.
would you go
So,
back to the website slide there just so that we have that one pulled up real quick?
oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, thestockcropper.com and like you said, X and Facebook there. So Zach, parting thoughts on Stockcropper as we record here in early 2026. There's a lot of excitement around it. I know there's a lot of stress associated with this too, just because it's a lot going on. You farm full time. Where are you at right now? What are your thoughts with Stockcropper? I know I'm excited, but where are you at?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a hell of a roller coaster of ups and downs over the last 6 years. I think anytime you have a startup, whether it's a startup or it's some type of new venture you're just trying to figure out, and there's a lot of pain and a lot of fun at the same time. And, um, you know, how do I say this? It's there. I've met a ton of great people along this. I have zero regrets for even the days that absolutely suck because there's been the good has so much outweighed the bad in these experiences, and I'm as bullish as I ever been or have been right now with I think we finally have a good uh, product to come to market that has a ton of potential, and I've got a fantastic team, and it just feels like we finally are here where it's going to finally happen, and I'm just really 2026 is going to be an incredibly stressful and hot hitting year, but I haven't had this much fun over the course of a winter doing stuff as what I have this year. So I'm really excited and I appreciate the support of people continuing to believe and I know it's taken a lot longer than what I had hoped originally, but this isn't easy stuff that we're doing, and especially when you're doing it on a shoestring budget, it just doesn't happen, like that. So,
Yeah.
but I appreciate your support. You've been an awesome supporter. And I love how you're like doing your own iterations of the farm weird stuff on your farm and sharing that with people. That's really the spirit, what this whole thing is about is sharing with other farmers. Don't have any ego about it. Don't try to protect it. There's not a lot of patentability in this stuff anyway with
Yeah.
arrangement. That's what makes it beautiful. So
Well, I appreciate your spirit. I appreciate your work that you're doing. I think it's going to have a dramatic impact in agriculture, not only in the immediate future, but kind of long term here. So, thanks for everything you're doing, brother, and appreciate the time. What do you got?
one more shameless plug.
Yeah.
I will be at Jason Mock's field day with the ClusterCluck
Oh,
Drive and the
yes.
Nano on June 27th in Gaston, Indiana. So I got to give my boy Jason a shout out. And so if you want to, especially if you're in the eastern part of the Corn Belt, Jason's field day is one of the best field days that you can go to, period. And the people you'll meet there are fantastic. And I'll be there with my stuff, and I'm really excited about that too. So.
Yeah, so June 27th, Gaston, Indiana. Hannah and I went last year for the first time. It was awesome. Great crowd of people, awesome presentations, live demonstrations of, the products that we're talking about here. And just to get to see Jason's beautiful mind do his presentations and all the other great people that are there. I highly recommend that. So, Zach, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it and looking forward to see where Stockcropper goes.
Thanks, Jay.
And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the Ag View Pitch. We will catch you next time.